If you've watched the channel for a while, you'll know I'm a fan of field watches. I'm a very analytical person by nature, so there's just something that instantly appeals and makes sense to me when looking at one. So if you like field watches as much as I do, it's only inevitable that you'll eventually wind up with a Hamilton, as not only do they offer a wide selection of military and field style watches, but I think they also make the best field watches around that could still be considered affordable. Not to mention they're the obvious and only real upgrade choice from the Seiko 5 field watches. Whether you want something more minimal and traditional, or something a little crazy, Hamilton's got you covered. With my favorite in the field collection easily being this Khaki King, and I actually sold that Khaki Aviation I reviewed previously to buy it. While the Khaki King is less traditional than say the Khaki Mechanical or the Khaki Field, I think it's a perfect watch for the modern world, or at the very least my world, as I think it looks just as good in the office as it does hanging out on the weekend. It's a watch that fits in while you're on a hike just as much as a dinner date. And while the black dial version would be more versatile, as you can see I went for the champagne version, and there are a few reasons for that, but the biggest one is the same reason I bought the red Orient Kamasu. I have other watches with black dials, and I'll no doubt buy more black dial watches in the future, but champagne dials are less common, and it's much less common that I actually find one I like. One of the best things about the Khaki King is its size at 40mm. When it comes to affordable automatic field watches, I've run across a few that are closer to 42, and I've run across a few that are smaller, more like 38. But I haven't found many in that 40mm sweet spot. Even with the crown, it's just under 44mm wide, so it's a size that really should fit most people. Lug to lug here might be a millimeter longer than I'd prefer, but it's still very wearable at 49.5. Height-wise, it has a thickness of 11.4, which I think is good for an automatic field watch. Lug width is 20mm, and I think it looks fantastic on a variety of straps. Weight with its stock leather strap comes in at just over 70 grams, so it has a good weight, but it's not overly heavy. Water resistance, however, is only 50 meters. 100 meters would be ideal, but 50 meters is fine for an everyday watch. Although 50 meters is a little unusual here when you consider that the Khaki Field is 100 meters. Now, retail price is around $530, but you can always find them online closer to $350. The case is rather simple and tool-like in nature, with the case shape greatly defined by its thin curved lugs. The overall finishing is good, and that includes the finishing on the bottom of the case and case back. The Khaki King has mostly a brushed appearance, and that includes the exhibition case back. The only exception is the polished crown and the polished clean bezel. Short but angular crown guards are at the right, and the crown is signed here with a simple H, but it isn't screw down, although with 50 meters of water resistance you wouldn't expect it to be. The top of the crown sticks out just slightly above the crown guards, so no problem winding it here whatsoever. However, pulling it out can be a little more challenging. You really need to get behind it and get your fingernail in between the case and the crown. The overall case shape is rather simple, and reminiscent of classic field watches, with only two features that really stand out. The first is how angled and low the lugs go when looking at it from the side, and the other is the clean polished bezel when looking at it from the top, which in many ways really frames the dial and focuses your eyes right on it. The crystal on the back is most likely mineral, but the crystal on the front is sapphire, and it has a very slight domed curve to it, and I appreciate how the angle on the crystal's edge matches that of the bezel, giving it a nice continuous look. Like the Khaki Aviation I previously reviewed, the dial here has 3 different sections, and just as before with that Khaki Aviation, I really love the dial layout here. It may look a little busy, but it's very logical and easy to read, just as a field watch should be. Starting at the edge, you have a very narrow but detailed chapter ring with minute indicators, and I think it's very well designed. It's not very wide and the font is rather small, but I think it all flows together very nicely. At the very outer edge, you also have some loom pips at each hour mark. The loom pips aren't very big, which means the loom they generate also isn't very bright. But at least there's something there, and you really wouldn't want them much bigger. It would crowd an already busy dial. And it's important to note that this section has more of a brushed finish, which contrasts nicely with the middle section, which is defined by very fine circular grooves. The dark black coloring of those indicators really stands out against the backdrop of the champagne dial, and especially of the middle section, which is far more reflective than the inner and outer section, as the inner section is also brushed, just like the outer, although it does have a bit of a sunburst effect. 24-hour indicators are also painted on that inner section, in a very small, unassuming font, as well as the Hamilton logo at the top and the phrase "khaki and automatic" at the bottom. And I have to say that this section near the Hamilton logo does look a bit crowded, especially with the 24 indicator lowered because of the date cutout. I'm not really sure how they could have done this better, but it just feels a bit busy. Now, one of the key defining characteristics of the Khaki King is the day-date complication at the top. And personally, this is a feature I love and what initially attracted me to the Khaki King. For an everyday watch, I really appreciate having a day and date. And here, I really like the visual appeal of that extra long date at the top. It's a feature that I think separates the Khaki King and really lets it stand out from other field watches. And I appreciate how it doesn't interrupt the symmetry of the dial, unlike some watches that have a day and date at the 3. In fact, I think it even enhances the symmetry by making a small T-shape at the top, which I think really helps orientate your eyes when looking at it, as you know instantly what the top of the dial is. That said, I can understand how some people would not like this feature, whether you're somebody that just prefers a cleaner dial, or if it bugs you that they cut off the Arabics at the top. I think it really just comes down to a matter of personal preference. And if you don't like it, then Hamilton's got plenty of other watches that are more traditional looking. There is one thing I don't like about it, and that's this little yellow frame that goes around the date, which I think looks a little plasticky zoomed in. Now, I do need to stress that under normal viewing conditions, it looks perfectly fine. In fact, I didn't even realize there was any sort of framing around it until I looked at this footage. When it comes to the hands, I'm not really sure what the official name is for this shape. It's sort of a cross between syringe and sword. But whatever it is, I really like it. The length is also perfect here, especially that of the minute and second hand. I just love how the second hand skirts along the very edge of the chapter ring. Now, it would look better if this was a high beat, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The hands have a stainless outline with white loom centers, and it adds some needed contrast against the champagne dial. But it's not the best when it comes to contrast. And this is an area that I think the black dial version does better. In fact, just the overall contrast and readability of the black dial is going to be better here. Partially because the champagne dial is just really reflective. Now, I'm not sure if there's any AR coating on that crystal, but if there is, it needs some more. That said, I did wear the Khaki King in a variety of different conditions, even taking it outdoors hiking, and I can say that I never had a problem reading it. Now, while the reflectiveness does interfere a little with the contrast and readability, I think it does greatly add to the visual appeal, especially with the finishing of the middle section reflecting the light differently than the other two. And this is an area that I think the champagne dial is actually better at than the black version. On most of the footage I've seen of the black dial, you barely notice the circular pattern in the middle section, and here it's just very obvious and very attractive. So for me, the reflectiveness of the dial and its different textures is a huge part of its charm, and the main reason I chose the champagne dial. Now, the movement requires a little bit of a discussion, and it's a little controversial for some people. In the past, Hamilton was using ETA movements, and I think they were using a 2834-2 or something like that. But a few years ago, they switched to a different movement, one that they're calling the H40, which I believe is actually the same ETA movement, just significantly modified. By improving the mainspring and dropping the frequency, they've actually doubled the power reserve. So the good news is that the power reserve is now sitting around 80 hours. The bad news is that the beat rate has been reduced to a standard beat rate, and it's lost that sweeping second hand that some have come to expect. So is this a good thing, or is this a bad thing? Honestly, it's kind of hard to say. See, on one hand, people love Hamilton because it's an affordable way to get into Swiss watches, and people associate that smooth second hand from a high beat movement with more expensive and a better quality watch. Yet if you're talking about something that at its heart is supposed to be a military tool watch, or at the very least inspired by that, picking an increased power reserve does make sense. It's an increase in durability and endurance over, say, a refined look. Honestly, I don't know. It really just comes down to personal preference. And for me and what I plan to do with this watch, if I had to pick between the two, I'd pick the increased power reserve. But in a lot of ways, this is kind of a moot point. Those older watches with the ETA movements are getting harder to find, so this is really all they're making anymore. Not to mention that this is the direction Hamilton seems to be going across their entire collection. So the end result for the H40 is that it's a standard beat rate with hacking and hand winding, but 80-hour power reserve. And one thing I do love about this movement is the instant change of both the day and date at midnight. Another change to the H40 that is worth mentioning is to those that like to regulate their own watches. The regulator lever that you normally come to expect is gone here. I'm sure you can still regulate it, but I think the process is now much more complicated, and more complicated than I want to deal with right now. Luckily for me, however, is that the movement here is spot on, and on average only lost about a second a day. On to the Loom. Initially, everything is bright, including those Loom pips at the edge, which was a little surprising. For comparing the longevity, I've thrown this up against a diver, my Orient Kamasu, and my Filson Mackinac, which is part field watch, part diver, and the Loom on it is just crazy. At first, everything is nice and bright on the Khaki King, but after 40 minutes, the Loom pips on the edge and the second hand do fade. They're still there, just rather faint. However, the hour and minute hands are nice and clear, and I'd say they're just about as bright as that Orient Kamasu. So as far as the hands go, the Loom is good and on par with a diver. Now, as far as the black dial version goes, you have both a bracelet and a leather strap option. But the champagne dial, you only have that leather strap. And here it's a dark red-brown leather with white stitching. Overall, I think the leather is actually pretty good quality, and the hardware here is great. I actually really like the look of the buckle. My only real complaint about the strap is that the leather for the keepers is a bit thin. Yet even though there's nothing wrong with it, I just never really warmed up to that strap. Part of it has to do with the color. I think that color looks good with the black dial, but not so much on the champagne. But more importantly, it just never felt right. Depending on how I secured it, it was either too loose or too tight. And when it was loose, it just really felt like I was lifting the watch up rather than conforming it to my wrist. The leather is a bit stiff, so maybe I just didn't give it enough of a break-in period. But after a couple of weeks, I just really gave up on it. Since then, I've worn it on a variety of different straps. And for the moment, I think it's going to stay on this one for a while, at least if I don't put it back on that green Nato. And I have to say that on all the other straps I put it on, I just loved how it wore. Plus, I just love the presence and look you get with that champagne dial. It's easily a watch you can dress up or dress down, and one that can easily pull double duty, and I think even look good with a suit, which I think also makes this a great watch to travel with. Lastly, let's talk value. Now, you can usually find these for around $350 online, which makes them one of the most affordable watches from Hamilton you can get, along with the Hamilton Khaki Field, which is one of the reasons they are so popular. You'll also have a hard time finding a more affordable automatic field watch. The only ones I've really run across are the obvious choices, and that is some Vostoks and the Seiko 5 field watches. Yet the Hamilton is easily on a different level with refinements and improvements across the board. The thing is, I don't think you should focus too much on comparing those. A lot of Hamilton owners, myself included, originally started out with those Seiko SNKs and SNZGs, and only looking to buy a Hammy once they really got bit by the watch bug. And I think people really love them both for just different reasons. Another reason the Khaki King is such a great value is because it's so popular. As a result, you can occasionally find them on sale. Plus, the champagne dial isn't quite as popular as the black version and can often be found with just a little bit of a discount. So if you're patient and you look around, you can occasionally find a really great deal on one of these. To sum it up, I think the Khaki King is one of the best field watches you can buy for the money. And for me, it's definitely a keeper. It's not perfect, but I just love the look, the feel, and the versatility of the piece. Now, my question to you is not only, what do you think of the Khaki King, But if you love field watches, what's the next logical upgrade from the Khaki King? The only thing I can really think of is maybe a Loom Tech or a Longines Conquest, but what do you have to say? And as always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for joining me.